real life, connect with Jesus. I'm Peter Wallace, and this is Day One.
Welcome to Day One, the weekly program that brings you outstanding preachers from America's historic Protestant churches, sharing insight and inspiration from God's Word for your life. Now, to introduce this week's preacher, here's our host, Peter Wallace.
Thank you, Sherry. We're delighted to welcome back to Day One the Reverend Hardy Kim, pastor and head of staff at Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church in Sunnyvale, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. Second-generation Korean American, Hardy was born in Seoul, South Korea, and grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, and near Detroit, Michigan. Hardy studied government at Harvard University, law at the University of Michigan, and then earned his Master of Divinity from McCormick Theological Seminary. Earlier, he served at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, First Presbyterian Church of Atlanta. Hardy, it's great to have you with us again.
It's great to be back again.
You were with us last week, and we learned a bit about the people and the ministries of Sunnyvale Presbyterian Church where you serve. I would imagine the Silicon Valley culture must be a rather unique place to serve. What are some of the challenges you face?
I do think it's unique. I'm still learning a lot about it. I think one of the challenges that isn't readily apparent is that the area and the people in it has undergone a lot of transition in a very short period of time. So we think about the rapid rise of tech companies, but that also means that the whole community has experienced a lot of change in the space of a couple of decades. So people who are very used to a much more quiet neighborhood, to having fruit orchards all around them, all of a sudden surrounded by tech giants, there's more traffic, there's a much more diverse population. And while I think people do their best to see that as a blessing, it's also difficult to know how to connect with one another and to form one coherent, loving community in an area where people speak different languages, have different cultural expectations, and just really have different experiences of the area itself.
And there's a general challenge, I think, of making church relevant in this world, particularly with emerging generations. Have you figured out how to overcome these challenges?
I have not.
But you're working on it.
I am working on it, and I do feel like my experience working with young adults in a place like Chicago has helped a lot. But I do think that there is a way in which even for Gen Xers like myself, and then for generations that come after me, the church didn't keep paying attention to things that were happening in the culture in a way that helped to develop ministries that remained relevant to the ideas, the questions, and the concepts that dominate our perspective now. I do think that part of it is that the church got caught up in very specific questions that were dividing our culture, like sexuality, for instance. And those were necessary conversations. However, we stopped paying attention to other things. For example, aside from sexuality or the LGBTQI community, we have different sexual norms in our society. We have different ideas about what relationships are good or possible. We have not spoken that articulately or well to those sorts of things. Add to that the fact that our life trajectories are very different from previous generations, and figuring out career opportunities and options and vocation is just another one of those things that, again, the church has stopped speaking so much about in ways that are really relevant to the challenges that we're facing. And so, in a lot of ways, I think the thinking of people within the church about what we have to say to the rest of the world needs to be updated.
Marty, you studied government, then law, and finally theology. How did your calling unfold for you?
That journey was not one I always managed well. But I do think that there is a common thread in all of those things. In all of those things, there is a question of how do we order our lives individually and collectively that life is good, that there's justice and peace and harmony. Those three disciplines go about those things a little bit differently, but I think the underlying questions are the same. I think I ended up working as a pastor in a church because doing things as a member of a community mattered to me. And I'm not saying that politicians or attorneys don't do that, but I think that there is sometimes a combativeness or a competitiveness to those sorts of arenas that I hope isn't in most of our churches. I know sometimes it can be.
Your vocational discernment, I understand, was greatly influenced by a year you spent serving as a mission volunteer in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Tell us about that experience.
It was an amazing experience. And first, I should say that some people would say it was Belfast, Northern Ireland, and others would say it's Belfast in the north of Ireland, depending on which side of the communal divide you were on. But what that year meant for me, first of all, was the confirmation of the fact that I felt called to be a part of a community in my work, and that faith was integral to my being sustained in the work to which I was called. Second, it really taught me patience and the importance of building relationships before solving problems. The ongoing poverty of opportunity and also the ongoing effect of trauma from conflict was something that I had not really experienced firsthand in my relationships with people before in my work. And so working with young adults there who found it difficult to see opportunities for themselves and who also had been affected by violence, each one of them having known somebody who was died or put into prison for different reasons, meant that it took a long time to build relationships where we could have trust, have honest conversations. And so I think that's something that I really carried with me into my ministry now.
Of course, Ireland has been deeply, even violently divided over religion. We find ourselves today in a culture that is deeply divided by politics and religion. Seems to be worsening in many ways. How can people of faith in their congregations work to bridge these divides?
That's a very good question. I would say we have a lot to learn from people in Ireland. They, I think, came to the realization that there was only a few